Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Russo. I am the Senior Director of Business Line Management here at PDR. As we approach this subject, MLR, MedLegal, MRL, DAX, TRAX, DAC, no matter what you call it, we all have a legal regulatory obligation. Because we know that this is such an important topic for many of our clients, I actually asked a group of experts to join me here on stage here. And I'm going to ask each one of them to identify themselves so that we can give you a little bit of the context of the remarks we're going to give today. Mukesh, maybe we'll start with you.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Mukesh Mehta. I'm the Vice President for Clinical and Regulatory Solutions for PDR Network. And in my job, I provide some insight as well as intelligence to our external or other clients within the pharmaceutical as well as the other stakeholders.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jeff Davis. I'm the Senior Vice President of Sales for PDR Network. I've been with this organization for about the past year. I came from an interactive patient check-in technology platform to help continue the transformation of PDR's legacy publishing-based business to an interactive, multi-channel, technology-based one.
Andrew Gelman, you met me earlier today, so probably no further introduction necessary, right?
Your reputation.
There you go.
So I know, I think it was Nancy this morning who made a comment that she was looking forward to this panel because there have been times where we think about MLR or med-legal review as crossing a chasm. And that can be sometimes difficult in an era where the old paradigms simply don't always apply anymore. And so as we were starting to think about our remarks for this panel, we really wanted to think about how we could make crossing the chasm of med-legal review feel a little bit less like this. Sometimes it feels like we're operating without a net. Sometimes it feels like we can't necessarily abide by the old rules, or at least we need to have the rules adapt to our new purposes. About 2 years ago, probably during this very conference, it was very common to talk about developing an EHR strategy. What does it mean to have an EHR strategy? How do I develop an EHR strategy? Really, the turn of the lens that we've taken is how do we help our clients participate meaningfully in EHRs? Once we've accepted that EHRs are a strategic imperative, and I think just warranted by the fact that you're in the room today means that many of you, if not all of you, have, we've got to figure out how to make the old paradigms really applicable in some of the new platforms that we're looking at. Again, we heard remarks this morning, it's a nascent industry. It's something that is constantly changing and developing. So we may need to look at things a little bit differently than we have in the past. It often feels uncomfortable, but we're here to tell you that it's not necessarily insurmountable. We know, I want to preface these comments by saying we're going to talk a lot about a very specific product that PDR offers today. It's called PDR Brief. I know that many of you are familiar with it. Several of you may not be, so we are going to give you some background. Please keep in mind that the reason that we're talking about a specific product here is really not necessarily to sell you information or to sell you a particular product. It's really that we've found that a relatively granular discussion with our clients is really essential to having a meaningful discussion during med-legal review. So again, please take these comments as really indicative of how we're helping our clients navigate this chasm, begin to cross this chasm, rather than something that we necessarily think is applicable at every point in the turn. So when we were initially designing PDR Brief, we had things that we felt were very important to the foundation. We'd like to take you through those as the background. We all know that PDR has a very storied history in providing full, current prescribing information. So that was absolutely foundational and absolutely paramount for everything that we do. So in addition to making that among our first priorities, we also wanted to make sure that it was at the fingertips of the people who are using the information, that is, prescribers. So again, the current prescribing information, part of PDR's history, it needs to be usable and accessible, and it needs to be at their fingertips in this new paradigm of EHRs. The second principle that we really adhered to and continue to adhere to is the fact that this is treatment triggered. We're going to spend a lot of time today talking a little bit about what we mean by that. But in general, what we mean is that the appearance of brief within an EHR is triggered by a provider action or provider decision. That we have found is really important when it comes to helping folks who sit on med-legal panels understand the context in which brief appears. Again, some of the folks on your panels may be very, very informed about EHRs, how they work, how they function. Some of them may not be. So one of the things that we've discovered, and again, we wanted to share with you today, is how brief functions so that you can have a really robust conversation with those folks. And then thirdly, it was really important to us because not only we service our pharmaceutical, biopharmaceutical clients, as well as the EHRs that we partner with, it was really important that we always keep in mind the end user, the physician, the prescriber, and that our prescriber interface be more than an afterthought. You're going to hear a lot about that during a session later on in the day with Barbara Senich and Vita Larkin, but it's just know that it's in the background of pretty much everything that we do and everything that we've designed at PDR. So by way of preliminary remarks, I can hear many of you in the room, in your head, already saying, well, that's great. We have a foundational framework, but I have a med-legal panel that it has very strict stipulations. They expect very transparent answers, and I need a lot more than a good framework to get me to a place where my med-legal panel is comfortable. So that's actually why we're going to take you through some of the examples that we are today. I think first and foremost, we've discovered that because some of the products and some of the services that we talk about during reviews are different, some of our clients even are thinking about how they may classify this during med-legal review. I was hoping maybe, Andrew, you could comment a little about the context that we usually take this in.
Sure. Well, first of all, every company and every brand has a different view of some of the requirements. There are obviously the basic legal standards that are out there that we all have to adhere to, but a lot of what we're seeing in the MLR reviews are interpretations, and interpretations that are not just company-specific, but very brand-specific. And then those interpretations may change over time as some of these panels become more comfortable in the EHR. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today reflects our experience and understanding over the course of the last year and a half that we've been doing this. So how would an MLR team look at this? And how we frame PDR brief specifically is there's the regulatory information, and then whatever specific product support messaging that a brand would want to put in PDR brief, we consider that to be a reminder ad. And so that's the basic legal premise that we set forth. And because of that, you could argue that there is no requirement to have ISI or full label, full prescribing information with that reminder ad, because all you're doing is reminding the prescriber about the medication. And partly that's because we have guidelines that we put forth in a white paper that that provides very strict editorial guidelines about what we're comfortable putting in that environment, and I think that was based largely on that premise. That said, even though we consider it to be reminder ads, and that's what we put forth to the MLR panels, we also provide the full prescribing information there. And in addition, if a brand feels it's important or an MLR team feels it's important, we also put a link to the important safety information. So those things together, I think, is really valuable to really get it across the line, and that's how we premise PDR brief.
Yeah, so Andrew brings up a really important point, and two things I wanted to mention here. Number one is when we interact with our clients, we actually find that some of the services that we talk about have a tendency even to unite what sometimes can be siloed teams across our clients. So I think in some of the various reviews that we've gone through, in certain cases we've been brought in maybe by somebody on the medical team because perhaps that's a historical relationship that PDR has had. In other cases, we may have a very forward-thinking brand manager who is very interested in exploring the EHR channel, hears about what PDR is doing, and so therefore calls us in. What has a tendency to happen is, I'm sure I don't need to tell all of you, is that usually during some type of med legal review, all of these disparate areas get together. So we wanted to put this up just as to articulate the various areas that we found really helpful to have in your corner when it comes to a med legal review for something like a new EHR strategy. So I think we've mentioned the brand already, the medical team, the legal, Andrew gave some remarks on. We also find ourselves working a lot kind of in cross organizations with digital centers of excellence or some of the innovation teams that you heard about this morning. This certainly isn't an exhaustive list. The other group that we know to get very, very involved early on is the regulatory folks. And that's one of the reasons that I really wanted Mukesh up here on the panel as PDR's counterpoint for some of the regulatory issues that our clients face. One thing that we're asked very often is any information that PDR can share about some of the discussions that may have happened with the FDA, specifically around some of our services. So Mukesh, maybe can you comment on that?
Sure. So about 2.5 years ago, when we were conceptualizing the PDR brief, we knew right from the beginning that sooner or later we'll have to show a brief to people within the FDA, especially Office of, in those days it was DDMAC, now Office of Prescription Drug Promotions. So last year at this summit, Dr. Janet Woodcock, the director of the CEDAR, she indicated that, first of all, we need to ensure that the full and current FDA-approved prescribing information is available within the EHR. Not only that, she indicated that this information should be available at the time physician is electronically prescribing. And then last year, around the third quarter of last year, we have had several conversations with Tom Abrams, who is the director of the Office of OPDP. And during one of those conversations, we showed him the PDR brief as an example of how the PDR brief content surfaces within the EHR, especially at the time the physician is e-prescribing. He was very favorable to the, especially to the completeness of the information provided to the prescriber at the point of care. He also indicated that he would be reaching out to the larger OPDP staff and the review team and share the PDR brief material. We let Tom know that some of our clients will be submitting PDR brief for some FDA guidance or advisory. While we cannot guarantee that the reviewer will remember this, however, as an organization, we have taken the proactive step to ensure that there's a smooth submission process for our clients. PDR goal is to create the foundation for success for our clients. At the same time, we respect the interpretation of applicable regulation or guidances.
Yeah, so I think that's a great segue. Respecting and appreciating the fact that each organization, and maybe indeed each brand, may have a different approach. One of the things that actually several of you in the room helped us with early on is ways of thinking about new channels, new tactics, new platforms, such as those represented within the EHR and within PDR Brief. And can we leverage things that are comfortable from older paradigms in order to actually make PDR brief or other EHR promotional programs a little bit more comfortable for the panels. So the next series of slides that we're going to share with you are actually, again, just think of them as the frequent flyer questions that we normally get when we're bringing an EHR program through med-legal panels with our clients. So Jeff, I actually think I'm going to ask you to comment on the first one. Again, this is just a general depiction of PDR brief and how it's going to appear within EHR systems.
Sure, so a couple comments. If it's not clear, we have spent a lot of time in med-legal review with many clients. It is incredibly exciting as it is for everyone. Typically, we do start here. It's often a review team and/or a marketing champion who has certainly had experience taking through or more traditional ad units. Sometimes even those that have been kind of, I think, to plagiarize Dave Juga's phrase, what was it, a lift and switch?
Shift.
Lift and shift, thank you. So, and we get it that the lens that review teams will look at that through are very well established. It's a banner ad, it's a standard ad unit. But so where we typically start with brief is, it's obviously not that. And so the first question then becomes, from the review team is, okay, what do we control? What do we not control? Because right out of the gate, we've got to get comfortable just with the core fact that we don't control everything in the box that is PDR brief. So I think that the screenshot that you're looking at is a good representation of the brand does obviously control their logo attribution, the @ sign with the telephone that can be a contact the manufacturer, keeping in mind that the brand and the manufacturer control the back end of all these things that I'm going to talk about. So your brand attribution, contact the manufacturer, going down the lines in brief, full prescribing information, boxed warning, alerts, and REMS, those are not under the manufacturer's control. Those are under PDR Network's control. So that's something to kind of keep in mind here. When you get down to lines 3 and 4, those are essentially deep links to very specific content assets that brief is a portal for, or a pipe. So the back end of those content assets are under complete control of the brand. And we have had instances, while it may not result in an optimal user experience, if you need to serve an interstitial page, are you a U.S. healthcare professional, et cetera, you can hit an interstitial page once the provider clicks on one of those sponsored links. So I think that's kind of been a very common starting point, is that, well, it's clearly not a banner, so what is it? What do we control? What do we not control? And I need to get comfortable with the fact that I don't control everything within that box.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And just to tag on to some of the remarks that Jeff is making, specifically about banner ads, right? We know that certain systems or certain, obviously, websites allow them, et cetera. So it's a way that you might be able to make your med-legal panel really comfortable with something like PDR brief, right? Or something interesting in the EHR channel that you're interested in doing. It's important, again, one of the reasons that we spoke about that kind of third prong of our foundation is that we're also always thinking about the provider experience. So that's why when we're looking at, things like content being sourced from the manufacturer, it's not necessarily something where you want to scream, this is an advertisement. We know that then takes us into the realm where it's not necessarily as palatable for a physician to have that type of thing in workflow. So we want to think about the content of the message being appropriate in terms of patient support programs, et cetera. And we also want to make sure that the format of whatever you're using, whether that's PDR brief or something else, isn't necessarily turning off the provider as they're engaging with their EHR and workflow. So we're going to show you another little example here. This, again, I think harkens back to some of the comments that Andrew initially made about how a lot of our clients are looking at brief. Again, it's some obviously full prescribing information, some information that would likely be determined to be clinical in nature, et cetera, also combined with some of the brand support information that you see represented in the lower half of brief. If we think, though, back to Andrew's comments about advertising and or reminder ads, we also know that some of our clients are going to look at it differently. So, I mean, Jeff, this is just another example of adapting, being able to adapt whatever you choose to do in the EHR system to make sure that your panel can be comfortable with it, right?
Right. I mean, internally, this is, I guess, the best cliche we could come up with was that if you want a belt and suspenders, if you need both those things, we can do that. So keeping in mind that the only time your brand messaging can appear is adjacent, essentially, to full prescribing information, if your review teams still require, for whatever reason, ISI, we can accommodate links to that. And we've actually had some fairly kind of creative language around that. The frame of brief is certainly flexible enough to accommodate that. So if it's not enough to have the adjacency to full prescribing information, which is the only time your brand messaging can appear, we can accommodate ISI as configured.
So along the lines of the belt and suspenders comment, we're often asked during med-legal panels if we recommend treating drugs with box warnings any differently than drugs without box warnings. So Jeff, you maybe want to comment on this next screenshot and what that has to do with belts and suspenders?
Sure, so this would be belt, suspenders, and Velcro. It's the best we can do. So a couple points or just observations. We do have several black box warning products approved and live in our network. So one of the things not under the brand's control, but under the basic configuration of brief, where there is a box warning present for the brand, that automatically appears. Keeping in mind one of the guiding principles for brief is that the value creation for our marketing partners does not come in a straight line from things like targeting, like conventional media would. The value creation for our marketing partners comes from the value creation that takes place by providing value to our end users by providing an integrated tool that helps them clinically. So that being said, one of the consistent signals every time we ask end users, prescribers, what are the nuts and bolts that we can provide for you that you really have to know about? Well, full approved prescribing information and boxed warning they float to the top pretty quickly. So my point is this. Anytime there's a boxed warning present, for the brand, it's going to be called out separately, distinctly, prominently, in the same place consistently in PDR brief. If your review teams require additional attribution of the black, for instance, what you're looking at, an abbreviated language piece around the boxed warning, typically we will park that in lines 3 or 4, the lines that you control. So we haven't, knock on wood, seen any black box warning requirements that we have not been able to accommodate.
So Jeff, I think, brings up a couple really interesting points. Number one is this idea of scale, right? How do you look at the different pieces and parts of brief, and how do you look at the different EHR systems that you may be interested in interacting with, and how do you make sure that there's going to be a fit there? I mean, Jeff, do you want to talk a little bit about networks, pilot programs versus getting to scale in the EHR marketplace?
Well, I think we've all heard different panelists, different speakers. I know it was called out on the pharma panel. One of the challenges, especially within the ambulatory care market, is how incredibly fragmented from a platform perspective that market is. So, and we've seen on the pharma customer side, our conversations, our relationships, our programming has evolved pretty rapidly over the last year. One of the things that's driving that is, I think someone referenced it earlier, 18 months ago, we had a lot of customers thinking about, well, should I have, or maybe what should my EHR strategy be? And you're going to do smaller test and learns. And that's okay. You can do a lot of those on individual platforms, but as scale becomes important, right now in the ambulatory care market, you're really looking at the need for a network, an aggregator of scale, which is what we do right now. Right? So I think within that, you've got to be able to communicate a few things to your review teams. These are multiple platforms. the look and feel can be a little different. The consistency comes from both the integration points that a product like PDR Brief, there are others out there, provides. So that's, you know where in the record it will appear. And then the product itself. So it's the four walls of Brief where we've been successfully reviewed by many of our pharma partners. But it's where it appears, what it looks like, and those have been a lot of very productive discussions.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's some of the early questions that came out as we started taking some of these services like PDR Brief through some med legal panels is, can you give me some comfort? I understand that you contract with umpteen EHR partners, EHR vendors, but can you give me some comfort about where this thing is going to appear and how it's going to appear? We know, again, that many of your panels are going to be expecting much more than, oh, just trust us, it's going to work. What we wanted to go through today is the 3 examples that we find really help articulate places in workflow where it can not only be acceptable to med legal panels to integrate something into an EHR, but actually also places within the EHR that physicians find that information to be helpful and palatable. So we're going to show you a few examples here. I think this first one is an example of a medication list. So a couple of preliminary remarks before I turn it over to our panel. One thing that we found really important, you may remember it served as one of our foundations as we were designing this, is that brief be treatment triggered. That is, it's always going to be controlled, or the surfacing of that information, in our case, is always going to be controlled by a provider action or a provider decision. The way that we have worked this out is that in order to get this brief to appear within an EHR system, the drug name has to be present. Now, that can be indicated by the name of the drug itself. It can be indicated by a code like an NDC that the EHR is passing to us. But in all cases, again, it has to be subsequent to a provider decision in some point. So maybe Mukesh, with that as backdrop, can you take us through a little bit about what we're looking at here on a medication list?
Sure. So this is a typical medication list that a physician or the provider will see on his or her EHR. As you know, again, there are some individuals from the regulatory and the legal side of our pharma in this room. This is a test environment, so no actual patient data is being displayed here. The medication list is one of the most important components of the EHR, and that medication list is used by a physician to fulfill some of the requirements, such as a renewal request from the patient or from the pharmacist. They are also used to assess the therapeutic response to a specific drug and to change the drug from one drug to another drug. So if you look at the physician, how they use the medication list is usually in some cases, the nurse would review the medication list before the physician enters the exam room. Or in other cases, the physician will go through the medication list, ask the patient, if they are taking any other drugs, including over-the-counter products. And a lot of times, a physician may see a drug that he is not familiar with it because a specialist has prescribed that product. So when the physician hovers over the drug name, the PDR brief surfaces. And if he or she is not familiar with that specific medication, he can see the full prescribing information and see what that drug is used for, what the common side effects, et cetera, are with that drug. There's another opportunities for the pharmaceutical companies is the patient may ask the physician, say, hey doc, the drug that you prescribed last time cost me $50 or $100 in copay. Do you have anything that could help me with that product? So if there is a copay assistance program or some kind of program that may help patients, the physician may offer that through this PDR bridge offering. Additionally, there are products that are self-injected, for example, by patient at home. And sometimes the patient may have question about the technique of self-administering these products. A lot of those pharmaceutical companies who have these products have visuals or video on their website. Again, this is another avenue for a pharma to provide those services to enhance the patient compliance or medication adherence.
And
Yeah.
just Mukesh, one thing to just interject. Just want to be clear. A medication list is a list of drugs where a prescriber has already chosen the drug. And it might not have been that day, but they've already chosen the drug in the past. So it's again, post-decision of the drug. And I think that's an important point to put out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, as those of you who are out there in the audience thinking about the programs that you already have in your arsenal, right? If we are thinking about one of those strategies where you're looking to utilize some of the existing materials that you already have or some of the existing programs that you already have, you might want to think about this in the context of a medication list. So adherence programs, things that patients will need once they have already been prescribed your drug, can be a really fruitful avenue. The next one that I want to surface for discussion really is very similar to what you saw in the first screen. The difference here is that we're looking at a full patient history. So in the previous screen, and you'll notice this is a different system, right? So this is, again, one of the ways that we've found that we can get your med legal panels a little bit more comfortable with the fact that the background information is going to be different, right? It is inherently a workflow tool that providers and physicians are using. But we can help them get comfortable by showing them examples of what these screens look like. So again, what we're looking at here is a patient history. Very similar to the example that Mukesh walked us through in the medication list, with the exception that there are different and additional data elements here. Again, one thing that I wanted to point out, particularly for PDR brief, is in this case, on a patient history, patient's already on the drug, number one. Number two is that from what we talked about being treatment triggered, right? The information for brief is triggered based on the fact that this information is already in the patient's history. So it's triggered by the presence of a drug code. I mean, panelists, do you want to say anything a little bit more about the context of a patient history sheet?
Yeah, I think pointing out the screens in the background, I mean, we tend to frame the context as PDR brief as a standalone device. The four walls of PDR brief we think is a unified whole, and it's quite artfully designed to have the regulatory full prescribing information with whatever product support messages are there. Your point about the fluidity of the information behind it is something that we literally cannot control. And that is part of the chasm that I think the MedReg legal folks need to appreciate, that what happens behind can't often be controlled. What we can control, what we do control, is saying that PDR brief can only be in certain screens throughout the EHR. It doesn't appear anywhere we don't contractually agree with the EHR that it will appear. And we're very careful about that. So in places where there may be something that might be challenging to a MedReg legal team, we make sure that brief is not going to appear on that screen, and I think that's an important point.
So I think that's important as we think about a lot of the really interesting and exciting forward-thinking stuff that's happening at a lot of our EHRs, and indeed where I know many of your heads are at, right, in terms of what can we do from a diagnosis perspective? What can we do with all of this, the vast amount of data that is available within an EHR? What we found is, though all of our heads are in that same location, sometimes MedReg legal panels aren't quite ready to go there. So what we've done, or what I would encourage all of you to think about, is designing whatever EHR tactics that you decide on, is designing them to the least common denominator, right? So make sure that you have safeguards in place so that your med legal panels can get comfortable with it. And as a lot of those forward-thinking ideas come to fruition, you don't have to go back and educate from the ground up with some of your panels. You'll already have a toe in the water, a foot in the water, a leg in the water, whatever it may be, so that they're comfortable within the context of an EHR environment. Anything else before we move on? Okay, great. So I think the last example, and again, the most logical integration point that we at PDR are seeing within EHRs is, of course, the e-prescribing module. So I think we're looking on this screen at a favorites list. This, again, as we get in front of some med legal panels, is something that we get a lot of questions about. So Mukesh, I was hoping you could give us a little bit of the clinical background before we start talking about how this may work within an EHR.
Sure. So some of the physicians, especially the specialists, have a favorite list because they are using the same drug over and over again. So if you're an endocrinologist, chances are you're seeing patients with diabetes, thyroid, et cetera, and you have maybe a dozen or a couple of dozen of medications that you commonly use. So that offers them one advantage is, and you saw earlier today, that physicians, if there's some solution out there where they have to click 6 or 7 times to get to the end results, chances are they may not use those solutions. It has to be 1 or 2 clicks. So that the favorite list provides that opportunity for physician to create that favorite list, first of all. Most EHR, not all, provide a shell where physician will fill in the drugs that they commonly use. One point to remember here is nobody has influence on what that favorite list is. It's only the physician who creates that list. Neither EHR vendor or PDR, of course, the pharmaceutical companies have any influence on the creations of the favorite list.
So Mukesh, one other question that has come up, and I think the point about favorites list is a good one, right? We don't control that, you don't control that. That's really based on an individual physician's decision about what drugs he or she is prescribing for the patients. If a prescriber isn't using a favorites list, how typically might they use an e-prescribing module within their EHR? Like, how do they get the drug to appear?
So basically what they would do in the text box, they will start entering the drug name and select the specific drug that he or she wants to prescribe. Or the other option is they will search the drug name and get that information. So anytime, so if the drug is selected or while typing in the text box, he or she can access the PDR brief and eventually the critical information, the full prescribing information is right there.
I asked Mukesh to really elaborate on that for a couple of reasons. Number one is we know that many of you and many of your med reg legal panels are really comfortable in the context of how do I make sure it appears at the right time, right? So in this case, the physician has already made a decision, right? He or she is already looking and actively searching for information on your drug, whether he or she is looking and choosing it from a favorites list or whether they are simply entering the name of a drug in order to put it in an e-prescribing pad. They've already made a decision about your drug, and that's something that, again, as we've worked through with several of our clients' panels, that's something that can be a very important point and can help us articulate the difference between how what we're doing within an EHR is different from something that might normally happen on an open website, for example, right? We're looking at this in a different way. I think to the points this morning, banner advertising is great, right? It absolutely has a place in everything that you're doing, and we certainly wouldn't look to denigrate that. What we're doing within an EHR is inherently different. It's based on a treatment decision that a prescriber has made. So I think the next screen that we wanted to show is, again, just an example of after provider physician has typed in the name of a medication or has selected it from a favorites list. Mukesh, this is an example of what might come up next, right?
Yes, this is the electronic prescription pad.
So again, as you're thinking about how your EHR tactics and strategies may come into play here, this is an area where the physician has already decided to prescribe a particular medication, and this may be an area that's ripe for opportunity in terms of some of the messages and some of the programs that you may have in your arsenal already that can be inserted in locations like this. The last thing that we wanted to show you again is just PDR brief, how that actually displays within this given EHR system. So once the prescriber, and for those of you who may be wondering, Melvin, what's Melvin? I've never heard of Melvin. It is just a general drug that we worked up so that we could articulate these points. So please bear with us on that one. Really, again, provider has already selected the drug to prescribe. In this instance, you'll see on the left-hand side, there's a little shield there, right? It looks like a PDR shield. Well, in this case, that's exactly how the information for PDR brief is triggered to come up. The provider asks for that information about the particular drug that he or she has prescribed. So in some cases, and depending on the EHR partner that we're working with, the PDR brief may be with a shield implementation like the one we're seeing here, or in some cases it may be automatic upon the provider's decision to prescribe. Again, so it depends based on the platform, the EHR platform that we're integrating with, and that's one of the things, as Jeff was talking about, getting to scale, right? We've got to figure out a way to have enough consistency across different EHR platforms in order for your med legal panels to really feel comfortable that we've safeguarded this enough for our pharma clients to be able to participate. You know, I think maybe Mukesh or Jeff, maybe either or both of you can both comment on this. One of the last questions that we typically get from our clients is in the context of full prescribing information, right? Hey, PDR, historically, we've contracted with you, you've put it in a book, in some cases maybe you've put it on a website, but how do I make sure that the information that is surfacing in the EHR, which, as we know, is both the right thing to do, you know, an FDA requirement, things that, you know, OPDP has responded positively to, how do I make sure that PDR actually has the right stuff? You want to comment on that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. There are two options. One, which some of our clients have done, is when they submit so to just kind of give you some brief background, since 2006, FDA requires submission of structured product labeling, or commonly called as SPL. The FDA doesn't accept any other format, Word document or PDF, etc. It's only SPL. So when the sponsor is submitting the SPL to the FDA for any changes or new product information, some of our clients have decided to send a copy of the identical valid SPL to PDR. So that's one option. And once they submit the SPL, we take it over from there. Then there is no work involved for the pharmaceutical clients. It, you know, it updates our electronic offerings, including brief content. The second option, which some of our other clients have opted for, is they allow us, or they authorize us to download the current SPL from NLM's DailyMed website. So the way it works is the FDA, I mean, if the sponsor submits the SPL to the FDA, and FDA on a daily basis uploads the same SPL to the DailyMed website. And we have a process internally that, so if a company A has authorized us to download their SPL from the DailyMed website, every day in the evening, our process will go and grab those SPL that are specific to that client. And there are some certain technology requirements for that. And we download that SPL from the DailyMed website, and then we update our electronic offering.
Yeah, again, we bring that up just because we know that a lot of you in the room have promotional leanings and that kind of stuff. But this, again, just so you know, is a question that we get a lot from the med legal panels, either on your behalf or with you. That definitely comes up. So I think those were the examples we wanted to walk through. I mean, I think we really just wanted to summarize very quickly in terms of things that are really important, best practices that we've seen in the year or 2 years since we've been doing this, and getting EHR tactics approved through med legal review. Agreement within the organization that EHRs are a strategic imperative. I think just evidenced by the fact that you guys are all here in the room, I think we've got that one covered, so I think we're good. You know, Jeff, do you want to talk about maybe just the importance of a strong champion within the organization?
Sure, and I think we have a number of those in attendance today, which is great. Champion sounds like a very, I mean, it is obviously a strong word. I think more than anything else, you have to be willing to have the conversation that this is about workflow integration. This is where our customers now spend their day. And you have to be willing to kind of address some of the core points, and most of which we've talked about. But at the end of the day, if the perceived risk of anything other than a conventional ad unit served into workflow, if you can't kind of have the conversation to go beyond that, I think those conversations typically are much more difficult. So, we've had a lot of them, and I think, we've seen, especially in the last 8, 9 months, 10 months, that the conversations internally with the review teams, it's starting to really kind of gain momentum. Like they may not have the exact specs for the lens to look at this through, but they're willing to have the conversation. Like, it's not a binary, well, it's that way here, so it has to be this way here.
So, I think in conclusion, I just want to make sure that those of you in the audience know, the 4 people on the panel up here, we have each attended numerous med legal reviews, as well as other folks in the audience, or other folks at PDR. We're happy to support you in those cases to help you prepare. If you want us to come to your panels, we're happy to do that. We're happy to take the hot seat during reviews to help with some of your panelists. We've got some background information on EHRs in general. Again, we think this is a strategic priority for our clients, regardless of which tactics you end up implementing. So we want to make sure that you can help get your med legal panels ready for the new platform that is EHRs. We really hope, I think we have time for maybe just a question or two. We really do hope that through this discussion, you've seen the chasm, you've begun to understand that the chasm can be crossed, and we're hoping that what you see now, instead of a big leap of faith, is a bridge across the chasm, that there are a lot of people in the room who have either already explored some of these tactics, or those of us on the panel, we'd be happy to talk to you about. Thank you. One or two questions? Do we have one or two questions from the audience?
So I wanted to ask, everything that you presented just now has to do with actions at the point of prescribing. But at various times today, we've heard about things like medication adherence programs that pharma companies have information on they'd like to convey, or health and wellness programs. Obviously, that doesn't fit into PDA brief, but can you sort of give a sort of a outline picture of how information like that fits into the digital workflow?
Yeah, I think I'll give some preliminary remarks, and then maybe our panelists can as well. Thanks. I think that's a great question. I think one of the things that really struck me from this morning's conversation was, this is a nascent industry, right? It is just beginning to kind of burgeon and blossom. So I think one of the things that you're going to see is different approaches within different EHRs and different ways to get information in front of the provider and in front of the patient, right? So when you're asking about patient adherence programs, when you're asking about, some of the support resources, there may be things that you think are appropriate to put in workflow with the prescriber as he or she is prescribing or in a medication list. There may be things, the same things or different things that you're considering for a patient portal, right? And is there a way through some of these inroads and some of these mechanisms to get information from the provider at the point of prescribing and get him or her to actually promote that into the patient portal? So I think that's a really fruitful conversation for us to start thinking about with some of our EHR partners. I think it's also, as you're designing your programs at pharma, one of the things that you might want to consider as well. Panelists? Yeah.
So I do think that those kinds of programs do fit into PDR Brief and other different platforms that are out there, because remember, we're talking about a workflow. The assembly line practice of medicine today, we're not talking about somebody spending a half an hour with the patient going over an adherence program. They're going to click and be done and moving on to the next patient. So PDR Brief and other platforms like that are designed to get the doctor in and out, and the program is really incumbent upon the patient or caregiver to do it. So I think that they fit perfectly into that, and And all the things we've talked about today fit in as well. A lot of the programs that that are promoted in PDR Brief and other platforms like it, those are programs that are already approved through MLR with the company's team in the past or in other environments. So the beauty is that we're just linking to programs that are already approved. So.
I would add one thing to that. So things like adherence, we're definitely thinking about it. We have a product in development right now that would, at least with some of our partners, be integrated into PDR Brief. So we're very much thinking about what are the inflection points, what are the integration points that, to Andrew's point, you know, where can we help the clinician cleanly and quickly get in and out with thoughtful, relevant information that they will use within the boundaries of workflow? Because one of the clear signals that we keep hearing from the end user is, you know, could be a really elegant solution that solves the problem at the top line, but if my click burden goes up because of it, I'm not going to use it. So I think, you know, the vaguer part of the answer would be, you know, it will depend on how the platforms evolve, but it's something that we're not only thinking about, but working on.
So thanks, everybody. I'm sorry, I think I have to cut us off, but we are actually, all of us are here all of the day. So if there are curbside consults or anything that we can give to you, please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you.